The sun rose slowly over the wide plains of Orlis, touching the golden edges of armor and turning ribbons of smoke into silver streams in the wind. The cries of soldiers filled the air, mixed with the clash of swords and the roar of cannons. Dust covered the field, and the smell of burning wood spread through the broken valley, where once there had been green grass. Ethan Crow was just another soldier in the army of Orlis. He did not come from a noble house or wear polished steel like the captains. His armor was old, and his sword had many scratches. Yet he stood firm when others backed away. He had promised his mother long ago that he would serve his land with honor, no matter the cost. That morning, his small group had been placed at the south gate, where the fight was thickest. The enemy had already burned half the town near the castle walls, and their banners waved dark and red. Ethan could see people running, soldiers yelling orders, and horses rearing in fear. There was no beauty in war, but he had no time to think about that. As he moved forward with his shield in hand, he heard a cry that cut through the noise, a young woman's cry. It was not the cry of a soldier, but of someone unarmed and terrified. Ethan turned and saw two enemy men dragging a young woman across the stones near a fallen carriage. Her gown was torn and her hair was tangled with dust. She was screaming for help, twisting and fighting against their rough hands. Without thinking, Ethan charged forward. "Let her go," he shouted, though his own voice was lost in the storm of sound. The first soldier turned too late. Ethan's sword struck his shoulder, sending him to the ground. The other tried to draw a blade, but Ethan slammed into him with his shield and brought him down with a blow to the head. The woman stumbled back, gasping, clutching her arm. Ethan turned to her quickly. "You must run. Find the healers near the south gate." But before she could move, more enemies came from behind the ruins. Ethan stepped in front of her, raising his shield again. There were too many, 5, maybe 6. Arrows flew through the air, one slicing his arm, another hitting his shoulder. His shield cracked under a hammer's hit, but he did not step aside. The woman tried to pull him back, but he stayed. Each time a soldier came close, Ethan fought like a man who did not care about life or death. His sword danced in the light, his armor broke piece by piece, and yet he did not give way. Every blow that should have struck the woman hit him instead. At last, she was pushed to safety by a group of Aurelian guards who had seen what was happening. They caught her and dragged her behind their shields. Ethan, bleeding and weak, fought on until the last of the enemy fell. His strength gave out. He fell to his knees, his sword slipping from his hand. The last thing he saw before his vision faded was the young woman being carried away by her own people. When he woke again, the world was silent. Battle had ended, and he was lying in a small stone room filled with the smell of herbs and honey. Sunlight touched his bandaged arms. He tried to move, but the pain held him still. A quiet voice spoke beside him, calm and gentle. "You should not move," the voice said. "Your wounds are deep." Ethan turned his head slowly. A woman sat beside him wearing plain robes. Her eyes were bright, and her hands looked strong though soft. She held a bowl of water and a cloth. He did not know who she was, but she looked at him with both kindness and sorrow. I have seen you before," he said weakly. She smiled a little. "May have, but it was not a time for names." Her tone was almost teasing, but her eyes were sad. She wiped the sweat from his forehead and dipped the cloth into the cool water again. "You risked your life for someone very important," she said quietly. "My daughter would be lost if not for you." Ethan's heart stopped at her words. He looked at her again, truly seeing her this time. The calm grace, the faint crown-shaped mark on her necklace, it struck him then that she was no ordinary woman. She was Queen Alara of Orlis, ruler of the land he had sworn to protect. He tried to bow, but the pain made him gasp. "Do not do that," she said gently. "You have done enough bowing for one lifetime." Her voice trembled slightly on the last word. She placed the water bowl aside and looked out the window. Far beyond the walls, banners of Orlis now flew again in the morning light. Ethan lay still, confusion clouding his mind. While the Queen of Orlis sat quietly beside him, the woman whose daughter he had saved, and whose eyes now held something more than gratitude. Ethan stayed many days in the healer's room, his body slow to recover from the deep cuts and broken ribs. Sometimes he thought he would never stand again, but every morning someone came to wash his wounds, bring him soup, and talk to him in a calm, low voice. It was always the same woman. She wore a light gray robe, not a crown or fine jewels, just a small golden chain around her neck. She moved with quiet care, never rushing, never scolding, always steady. At first, Ethan thought she was one of the royal attendants, but the way everyone else bowed to her and stepped aside made him wonder. One day, as she changed his bandages, a young officer entered the room and stopped mid-step. He lowered his head quickly and said, "Your Majesty, the Northern Scouts have returned. They await your word." Ethan's eyes opened wide. The bowl nearly slipped from his hand. The lady nodded to the officer, told him to wait outside, and turned back to Ethan with a faint smile. "So now you know," she said. Ethan tried to sit up, panic in his face. "My queen, I did not know. Forgive me for." She placed her hand gently on his arm. "There is nothing to forgive. You spoke to me as one human to another. It has been a long time since anyone did that." Her voice was soft, but carried a shadow of loneliness. Ethan wanted to bow again, but she shook her head. "If you move too quickly, you will open the wounds," she warned. "Please, just rest." In the days that followed, she came often. Sometimes she brought books or sweet fruit from the palace gardens. Sometimes simply sat near the window, watching the sun fade into gold over the far hills. She talked little about her duties as queen. Instead, she asked about his life before the army. Ethan spoke quietly of his family's small farm, of his mother's laugh, of the way his younger brother used to race him through the fields. She smiled at those stories as though she could see them in her mind. At other times she said nothing at all, only listened to the wind and the distant sound of bells. Ethan began to feel at ease with her, though a deep respect always rested between them like a quiet river. When he was well enough to walk again, the queen herself came to help him take his first steps. Her guards were uneasy, watching their ruler walk slow circles through the courtyard beside a common soldier. She paid them no mind. Ethan leaned on a wooden cane and took each step with effort, teeth clenched, sweat on his brow. The queen's hand stayed close, steadying him whenever he faltered. "You do not have to stay with me, Your Majesty," he said once, embarrassed at the sight of her helping a man like him. "What?" "I want to," she replied simply. "I owe you far more than time." He did not know what to say after that. The palace servants began to whisper. They spoke softly in corners about the soldier who had saved the princess and now walked in the queen's gardens. Some called it a story of kindness, others called it something more, but the queen did not seem to care. She had a calm strength that came from within, and when she looked at Ethan, there was no doubt in her eyes. One afternoon, a storm rolled in across the valley. Rain fell hard on the stone paths, and wind rattled the windows. The queen came to the healer's hall again, her cloak soaked through. Ethan had not seen her for 2 days because of council meetings, and he thought perhaps she had forgotten him. But when she entered, she looked almost afraid. "I dreamed you had gone back to the front," she said, half laughing, half trembling. "It troubled me so much that I came to see." Ethan smiled warily. "I am not going anywhere, not until these ribs agree to carry me. A soldier must obey his body before his orders." The queen laughed softly. The sound was gentle, not grand like one might expect from a ruler. She sat down, brushing the rain from her cloak. "You speak like a man who has seen too much," she said. "I have seen what happens when brave men fall for nothing," Ethan answered. "I fight because ordinary people deserve peace, not because I seek glory." She looked at him for a long while. "Peace," she whispered. "If only there were more like you, perhaps peace would not be so hard to keep." After that night, she visited even more often. When she could not come, she sent letters by her own hand, simple notes asking how he felt, what he ate, and whether the pain was less. Each letter ended with a small sign shaped like a sun, her personal emblem. Ethan kept them all wrapped in his blanket, though he never showed anyone. Then came the day when the court physicians said he was fit to leave. He should return to the army or go home, they told him. He packed his sword and looked out the window one last time, wondering if the queen would come. As he turned to go, the door opened, and there she was. "I hear you are leaving," she said quietly. "Orlis still needs strong men, Ethan, but I had hoped you might stay." He met her eyes, unsure how to answer. For a long time, only the rain outside spoke for them. Finally he bowed low, pain forgotten. "Your kingdom needs you more than it will ever need me," he said. "But your kindness I will carry with me wherever I go." She reached out then, almost as if to stop him, but withdrew her hand at the last moment. He smiled once, then stepped beyond the threshold, leaving behind the echo of her heartbeat in the cold marble hall. When Ethan Crow came back to the palace of Orlis, everything looked the same, yet everything felt different. The towers were high and white, the banners bright in the wind, and the guards still stood with stiff pride. But for him, the walls now carried memories that were heavy and deep. He remembered lying hurt in the healer's room, the queen's calm voice reading to him, her gentle hands washing blood from his wounds. He had left those halls hoping to forget. But now that he was back, all those moments rushed to him again like a wave that would not stop. As soon as he entered the court, people turned their eyes toward him. Some smiled politely, but others frowned or whispered behind folded fans. Everyone had heard the stories of the soldier who had saved the princess and caught the queen's sigh. Some believed it was courage, others believed it was luck, and a few said quietly that it was something more than duty. Ethan ignored them all. He was a soldier, not a man who cared for gossip. Queen Alara sent for him soon after his return. When he entered the grand hall, she was standing at the far end, beside a tall window that opened to the royal garden. The afternoon sun fell upon her, making her hair shine like gold. She turned when she heard his footsteps, and for a second, the formal stillness of the room seemed to fade. "Ethan," she said softly, as if she were speaking not to a soldier, but to a dear friend. He bowed low. "Your Majesty," he replied. "You sent word that you wished to see me?" "Yes," she said, "but not to send you back into battle. I wish for peace, Ethan. I called you here to help me keep it." He looked at her in surprise. "I am honored, my queen, but I am only a man who fights with a sword. I know little of peacekeeping." Her lips curved in a faint smile. "You know more than you think. You fought with heart, not only with steel. You saved my daughter because it was right, not because you were told to. That kind of strength is rare, and I need men like you around me." Ethan felt something warm rise in his chest, a feeling he could not name. But he only said, "I will serve however you command." In the days that followed, he was given a place among the palace guards once more. Yet this time his work took him inside the royal court instead of the battlefield. He stood watch during meetings, walked with the queen during her garden rounds, and guarded the princess when she went riding. The queen seemed always near. Sometimes she asked his opinion on small matters, like how to train the new recruits, or how to speak with the restless nobles who grumbled about taxes. Each time he tried to answer with respect, never forgetting his place, though her gaze had a way of making him lose his words for a heartbeat. The people of the court began to talk even more. Some said the queen was growing too fond of her hero. Some said he was getting ideas beyond his rank. Ethan heard the whispers but did not react. He had not come for favor or reward. He simply wanted to serve and to prove that one honest heart could still make a difference in a palace full of pride. One quiet evening, while walking on the terrace, he found the queen standing alone near the edge. The garden below was full of white flowers glowing in moonlight. She seemed lost in thought. When she noticed him, she did not move away. "Do you ever miss your old life?" she asked. "Yes," Ethan said after a moment. "Sometimes I miss the simple days, when I worked with my hands, when food tasted of the land, when night came with peace instead of duty. And yet you returned when I called," she said softly. "I gave my word long ago to serve this crown," he said. "But truthfully I returned because I could not forget your kindness." The queen's eyes lifted to his. There was warmth in them, but also sorrow, the kind that rulers carry when they have known too much loss. "You speak plainly, Ethan, and that is what I value most," she said. "The court is full of people who hide their hearts behind fine words. You are the only one who dares to speak what is true." He bowed his head. "Truth is easier for men with nothing to lose," he said. She looked into the dark garden. "You may not see it, but your truth gives me courage." From that night on, something began to change between them. It was not spoken aloud, but it lived quietly in every glance, in every look that lasted a moment too long. Ethan found himself watching her in silence, noticing small things, the way she touched the golden vines on the balcony rail, the sound of her laugh when the princess told her something funny, the tired line between her brows when the council meetings went too long. Yet he knew he should not feel such things. A ruler bound to honor duty and the countless eyes of her people. But the heart is not born to obey reason. and his heart had already chosen its path. One morning, during a ceremony in the courtyard, the nobles gathered under bright banners to praise the end of the war. The queen stood before them in a gown of silver, holding her daughter's hand. When her eyes found Ethan among the guards, her gaze lingered. It was only a second, yet for him, time slowed. It was not the look of a ruler to her guard, but of a woman remembering something tender and unspoken. Ethan stood still, the sunlight flashing across his armor. He knew that moment would stay with him forever. He had once endured the blows for her daughter, but now, day by day, he found himself enduring something stronger, the fierce pull of love he could not confess. And deep inside him, he wondered if the queen felt it too. The days in the palace of Orlis passed quietly, but peace never lasts long for those who wear crowns. Summer came with warm winds and fields full of grain, yet dark news rode in with the traders from the north. They spoke of a warlord gathering old enemies again, men who had once burned the borders and now swore revenge. The Queen's Council argued long into the nights, their voices sharp and loud behind the closed doors of the great hall. Ethan knew trouble when he saw it. Soldiers began to train longer hours, new guards filled the gates, and scouts left the city almost every dawn. The Queen had hoped that peace would last, but now danger crept close again. Ethan felt the weight of it in his bones. War never truly ends, it only sleeps for a time. One evening, Queen Alara called him to her private chamber. She was standing by the map table, looking down at the red lines that marked the kingdom's borders. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried worry. "They are coming again," she said quietly. "They burned to villages near the river. The council wants to send half our army north, but our people here will be left unguarded if we do that." She paused and looked at him. "You have fought them before. Tell me what you think." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes studying the map. "If they strike the north, they will strike hard," he said. "But they will also send riders south after to draw our forces thin. They always try to split the defense." The Queen nodded slowly. "You know their ways better than anyone," she said. He smiled faintly. "That's only because I still have their scars to remind me." For a moment she said nothing. Then she asked, "If I sent you north to command our men, would you go?" "You would not have to ask, my queen," he said, straightening. "I will go where you need me." Her gaze softened. "And if I asked you to stay? To guard not the border, but me?" The question caught him off guard. He did not know what to say. For the first time, he saw something in her eyes that was neither command nor gratitude. It was fear. Not the fear of battle, but the fear of losing someone she trusted. "My place is wherever you command," he answered at last. She looked away, hiding the shine in her eyes. "Then you must lead our men," she whispered. "But promise one thing, Ethan. Promise you will come back." "I will try," he said quietly. "Though you know a soldier cannot promise what he cannot control." That night the Queen stood on the terrace, watching as Ethan left the palace with his men. The moonlight touched his armor, and she whispered something to the wind that no one else could hear. The journey north was hard and cold. The roads were muddy, and rain fell for many days. Ethan rode at the front, his eyes always watching the horizon. When the enemy lines finally appeared in the distance, he felt the old fire inside him come alive again. His soldiers trusted him, for he never shouted nor threatened. He led by example, and they followed him without question. The first clash was fierce. Arrows darkened the sky, and the noise of metal meeting metal filled the air. Ethan moved through the lines like a storm, his sword flashing in the light, his voice calm even as the ground shook with the charge of horses. When one young soldier fell beside him, Ethan pulled him back to safety before striking again. He fought not for power, not for reward, but for home, for the land that had once given him kindness, through a queen who had believed in his worth. Days passed, battles came one after another, and still Ethan stood, but the price was heavy. His men were tired, his body bruised, his armor cracked. Yet whenever he thought of stopping, the image of Queen Alara's face came to him, and he kept fighting. At last, after weeks of struggle, the enemy fell back. Their leader was captured and the northern villages were safe. The victory came with Cosman and brave men lay wounded or silent on that field, but the kingdom was saved once more. When word reached the capital, bells rang through the city. Queen Alara wept in silence when the messenger told her Ethan still lived. She had not slept for nights, fearing she had lost him to the cold earth. She ordered her horse at once and rode north with a small group of guards. When she found him, he was sitting on the edge of the battlefield, his sword resting across his knees, his armor dark with dust and blood. He rose slowly when he saw her, surprise and warmth mixing on his tired face. "My queen," he said, half bowing though his body could hardly bear it. She dismounted without care for her robes and came to him. "You came back," she said softly, her hands trembling. "You told me to," he answered with a faint smile. "A soldier must obey." For a long time she said nothing. She simply looked at him, seeing not a soldier but the man who had carried hope into her heart. When she finally spoke, her voice broke. "You are more than a soldier, Ethan Crow," she said. "You are the heart of Orlus." The camp was quiet around them, the night wind cool on the burned ground. For that brief moment, war and crown were forgotten. There was only a queen, a man, and the faint light of dawn on the horizon, promising that peace, however fragile, might finally come again. The kingdom of Orlus slowly began to heal once again. The fields were green, children laughed in the streets, and the sound of hammer and song filled the air as the people rebuilt their homes. Ethan Crow returned to the capital with the queen's escort, his body tired but his heart strangely light. His wounds hurt, yet each step toward the palace felt easier than the one before it. He had kept his word. He had come back. When they reached the gates, the people cheered. They threw flowers on the ground as the soldiers passed. Ethan did not feel like a hero, but the crowd's warm voices made him bow his head with quiet pride. For a moment, he forgot that he had ever lived another life, one of mud, cold nights, and lonely roads. Here, in the light of the Queen's city, he felt seen. Queen Alara rode beside him, her face calm and noble, yet anyone who looked closely could see the small smile that appeared whenever her eyes found him. It was not the smile of a ruler greeting her champion. It was something gentler, deeper, the kind that spoke without words. When night fell, a feast was held in the great hall. Music played, candles glowed like stars, and food filled every table. The nobles raised their cups to the queen in her victory, but their eyes often drifted toward the soldiers sitting quietly among them. Ethan did not drink much or speak loudly. He only listened, grateful for peace and warmth. Later that night, when the guests began to leave, the queen asked to speak with him alone. They walked through the garden, beneath the moon. The scent of roses filled the air, and water whispered softly in the fountains. Ethan followed a step behind, unsure what she wished to say. When they stopped near the old marble statue of her ancestors, she turned to him. "Ethan," she said softly, "each time this land was in danger, you stood between death and my family. You gave more than any crown could repay." He shook his head. "My queen, I only did what any man of honor must do. You owe me nothing." She took a step closer. "You are wrong. I owe you my daughter's life, my peace, perhaps even my heart." He stared at her, speechless. She looked at him with steady eyes, the reflection of moonlight deep within them. Her voice trembled as she continued. "I have been many things in my life, a ruler, a widow, a mother, but never a woman allowed to choose for herself. When I met you, something changed. You reminded me that strength and kindness can live together. You made me feel alive again." Ethan felt his breath leave him. He wanted to speak, to tell her what she already knew, but words seemed too small for what filled his chest. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "you give too much praise to a simple guard. I have lived by duty, not by courage." "Then your duty has made you courageous," she replied. "Do you not see it, Ethan? This kingdom stands today because you believed in people more than power." For a long moment, silence lay between them. Then she reached out her hand. "Walk with me," she said. They walked slowly along the garden path. The night wind brushed the trees, carrying their faint music like a promise. When they reached the end of the path, she stopped once more. "The council will not like what I wish to do," she said softly. "They think only of names and birth, and the pride of the old families. But I have made my choice." Ethan frowned, unsure what she meant. "Your choice?" She turned to face him fully. "Yes. I will name you captain of the royal guard, protector of Orlus. Not for politics, but for your heart. And she hesitated, her voice suddenly very small. Beyond that, I would ask something more personal. Not as your queen, but as a woman. He could feel his pulse in his hands. What is it you would ask of me? She looked straight into his eyes. No crown, no command, only sincerity. Stay, she whispered. Stay not out of duty, but because you wish to. Ethan felt the truth of his heart rise and break free. He stepped closer, his voice firm but tender. I have followed orders all my life, but this time I follow what I want. She trembled slightly as he took her hand, and for a moment both forgot the world outside the garden walls. There was no queen, no soldier, only two souls who had found what neither had believed they would ever find again: trust and love born of sacrifice. Days later, when the court gathered again, Queen Alara stood before her people. The golden morning light shone over her like a blessing. In a clear voice, she spoke of unity between all her subjects, noble or humble. She told them the kingdom would now be built not on pride of blood, but on courage, compassion, and loyalty. When she finished speaking, she turned and called Ethan's name. As he stepped forward, the hall fell silent. She placed the royal seal on his sword and said, "You are the heart of this kingdom, the proof that goodness is its strongest shield." The nobles bowed, the people cheered, and Ethan felt warm tears sting his eyes. He knelt before her, but the queen took his hands and whispered so quietly that only he could hear, "Rise, Ethan, you bow to no one now." And so it was that the man who had once endured the blows for the queen's daughter became the one who would forever stand by the queen herself, not as servant or savior, but as the companion of her soul and the keeper of her peace. The land of Arliss remembered their story for generations, not as a tale of battle, but as a story of how love, born in sacrifice, can heal even a kingdom of war.